tell the story here with commentary. So it's sort of like when you watch the movie and you have the director adding commentary. It'll be kind of like that. So that's what we're going to do today. Talking about Isaac and Rebecca and everything that goes on there. When Troy asked me to preach into this a while ago, and he showed me, this is kind of the next story in the sequence of preaching through the Bible. I thought, oh man, that's not as fun a story as some of the other ones, right? It's not like the Tower of Babel or a lot of the other things that go on in Genesis. But I'll tell you what, the more that I looked into this story, there's a lot here, a lot of really good stuff. So I hope it really challenges you today. Because I know it challenged me. So, as an initial thought, matchmaking. Let's have an honest raise of hands. How many matchmakers do we have out there? Or would-be matchmakers? Okay, yeah, some people are honest. The rest of you, you know you are. So, and you know who you are. Matchmaking is a funny thing, and probably most young people who are past the age of 20 have experienced this. And I remember I went to Bible college, and so when I graduated Bible college, I was one of the few who was not graduating married, which was like, I don't know what it was, but it was like this big deal. Like, you can't graduate not married. You need a wife when you graduate. Says who? But anyway, so I went on to seminary, single, and which in my mind was a good deal because I got my Hebrew out of the way before I even met my wife. And that was, to me, that was a wise thing because first day of Hebrew, I remember we went in there and the teacher says, all right, how many of you are married? Okay, yeah, kiss your wives goodbye. You're not going to see them the rest of the semester. And I was like, okay, pass that one. But I remember, so I'm a seminary student. I was working at a church on the weekends, and I remember what it was like. I was like the most eligible bachelor or whatever, or actually the only. So, but it is, people are like, oh, I know this person over here. And it got pretty bad, such to the point that my pastor was actually sending me out calling to eligible young ladies. And I'm like, I know what you're doing. He's like, oh yeah, this family needs a visit. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure they do. Anyways. But matchmaking. Sometimes it works great. Sometimes, not so much. But what we're looking at here is sort of like matchmaking, but there's a lot more divine intention going on here. Still, you read through it, and it's an odd thing. We read it today, and it's like, what were they doing? But this is where we have to remember this was a long time ago in a very different culture. So we'll go through some of those things. What's going on here, because there's two things that we need to look for as we go through this story. First of all is God's providence in preparing the way for his plan. Providence, that's a big word for saying God's provision. I mean, the word's kind of there. But providence, that is God's provision for us. That is God's preparing the way for us. That's what we're talking about, first of all. But secondly, there's the faithfulness of his people. And there's key people in here that I believe these scriptures elevate and kind of bring forward and have us look at as models of faithfulness to God. So as we go through, keep that in mind. God's providence in preparing the way for his plan and the faithfulness of his people. They're two very important elements. So I kind of want to look at this as almost cinematically. So we open up with scene 1, and we are in the land of Canaan, I believe probably around the region of Hebron. What's happened? Okay, what's already happened here in the previous chapter is that Sarah has died. And it spends an entire chapter talking about that. So Abraham's wife has just passed away at 127 years old. So she's full of years, but Abraham goes on to live to 175. So he's still got a ways to go. But it's a big deal. It's a heartbreak for Abraham, and it's a heartbreak for Isaac too. And the scriptures say as much. So it's a huge event, and the entirety of chapter 23 is spent talking about her burial preparation and finding a place to bury her and all of this. And so it's a big deal. And this comes just after that. And there's no mistake that happened here, that it's arranged in that way. So Abraham now, he's about 140 years old. Okay? Not a young man, even by those standards. He was still a very old man, and it says that. He was full of years. Isaac is at the established marrying age, at 40 years old. Now we would say, whoa, that's getting up there. But for them, I mean, they lived to be quite a bit older than we do now. So he was established. He was developing his own land. He was established. He was ready. And Abraham recognizes that. But think about those years. So I was born in 1980. If Abraham was my father, that means Abraham would have been born in like 1880. So when you think about just the history that, my dad was telling me about the Panama Canal and World War I, World War II, and it's like his grandfather was in the Civil War, or his father was in the Civil War. It's like, it's a pretty big, a much bigger span than we're used to talking about. So Abraham calls his servant and commissions him to find a bride for Isaac. And he recognizes it's time. So who is the servant? Well, we're not told. A lot of people assume that this is Abraham's trusted servant Eliezer. It may be. The scriptures choose not to tell us. Really, it doesn't matter. So we're not told who he is. But Abraham starts by having this servant take a solemn oath. Okay? And this gets a little interesting here because, first of all, he says that he has him swear by the God of heaven and earth. And that's not like there's a God of heaven and there's a God of earth. It's an ancient, an old way of saying something, where you would take kind of one end of something and the other end of something, and it means everything in between. So he's saying the God of heaven and earth and everything in between. Sort of like in the Psalms when he says, our sins are as far as the east is from the west, same kind of thing. And it's just, there's no measure to it. So he has him swear by the God of heaven and earth, everything. But he also does something that, as you read it, it sounds strange. He says, place your hand under my thigh. And if it sounds weird, the more you study it, it just gets weirder. Okay? But the fact is, it was a very serious oath. We may look at it and say, well, that's strange. Why would you do that? But it was something that was very serious, and both of them would have recognized that. Because it was an oath based on Abraham's future generations, a.k.a. the very promise, the very covenant that God had made with Abraham. It's sort of like swearing on the Bible. That's kind of, we do that in court. We say, okay, put your hand on the Bible and swear that you are telling the truth. Okay? We do that, why? Not because the Bible's magic, but we're putting our hand on something that is sacred, that means something, and by doing that, making that oath very, very serious. And so that's what's going on here. With sparing you the details of what exactly was going on, let's just say if it was happening here, it would be extremely awkward. You'd be going, what in the world are you doing? But for them, it was something that was very serious because it was based on the very covenant that God had made with Abraham. So, in essence, Abraham is saying to his servant, swear on the covenant that God has made with me for my future generations, that you will do this, that you will go and find a bride. And Abraham has simple instructions. He says, because this bride cannot be a Canaanite woman. He sees what's going on around him. It's godless. There's not a God-fearing culture where he is. So he says, we can't look here. Okay, so I want you to go back to my relatives in Haran, and I want you to find a wife there. Now, we wouldn't do that today. We're talking cousins here, but let's just say the gene pool had a lot less chlorine in it back then. So it was a different time. It was a different time, and it wasn't something that was weird, strange, or illegal. It actually made sense because it was family. It was people that were related to them in thought and mind, and we'll see that's exactly what happens. But secondly, so the servant hears that, and he says, okay, I'll go back there and find a wife. But what if she won't come here? Should I take Isaac there? Abraham says, under no circumstances. So those are my two things. You must go and find a wife, but Isaac stays here. Because I don't want him getting caught up with what's going on there. God wants us here. This is our promise, our promised land. This is where we need to be. So those are the simple instructions. He packs up the servant with 10 camels, which, that would have been a pretty impressive caravan. We're not talking like, these were just things everybody had, especially camels. So a caravan of 10 camels was a pretty big deal, and all the people that go along with it. and he sends him out. And so scene 1 closes. Abraham has sent his servant out with this incredibly solemn, incredibly important mission, and with an oath that the servant takes extremely seriously. And so he travels, and we don't know what goes on in the travels. That doesn't really matter. But he arrives in the area of Mesopotamia. The Bible says the name of the place was Aram Naharaim, which means the land between the two rivers. And so we're talking about a big area there, but it says it's the city of Nahor. So we believe it would be the city of Haran, which, interestingly enough, is still around today. It's a little village in southern Turkey, close to the Syrian border. Still around. But that's where he goes. So he travels kind of north and westward. And I want you to pause just a moment. Look in Genesis 22 at verse 23. I'll read the verses up to it. This is, at the end of 22, we see a quick genealogy, okay, which isn't uncommon, but notice something here. It says, "Now after these things it was told to Abraham, behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor. Uz his firstborn, Buz his brother." By the way, great baby names here. Uz, Buz, I mean, great names. Penuel, the father of Aram, Chesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. I mean, hey, you can't get better than this. I mean, there won't be anyone else with these names, so playground could be a little rough. Bethuel, father, and then in verse 23 it says, Bethuel, father of Rebekah. He's a Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother, and so on. So it's interesting that it gives a very short genealogy, a very limited genealogy, and in that, where typically genealogies would list the male descendants, it says, oh, by the way, this is the guy whose daughter is Rebekah. Okay? Now we get to our story, and we kind of see why he mentioned that. So there's a bit of foreshadowing there about what's going to come here. So, the servant gets to the city, and he does two things. First of all, he acts strategically. So he set himself up at the time of day when he knew that the young women would be coming out to fill their jars with water. And whether this was, I mean, we read the word well, and we kind of imagine like a little round thing with the nice little wooden carriage, and you kind of pull up the rope, and you've got a bucket there. But I think it might have been something a little different, because sometimes it says well, sometimes it says spring. It could have even been a much bigger thing, where you would actually walk down inside of it, scoop out your water, and walk back up. Keep that in mind, because I think that's probably what we're talking about. But he's strategic, okay? He's thinking about this. He's not just going, okay, Lord, whatever's going to happen, here we go, I mean, he is thinking about this. So he goes at a certain time of day when he knows the young women are going to be coming out. He also acts spiritually. The first thing that he does is he stops and prays. It's not a last resort. It's not an afterthought. It's actually a critical part of his plan. He's like, okay, I'm going to go out at this time of day, yes, but before anything happens, I'm praying because I need to talk to God about this. And actually, his encounter with Rebekah is bookended by prayer. You know what I mean? There's prayer before it happens, and then after the event, there's prayer as soon as he realizes that she's the one. It is bookended by prayer, and that is no accident. And so as he prays, he uses this word about God's kindness. And that's a very specific word. It was the kind of word that you would use when you were talking about a covenant. The word that meant that the covenant maker is going to keep it. And so he says, God, based on your loving kindness, you will make this happen. And so he's calling on that covenant for God to come through for him. So it's interesting the test that he comes up with. Because it's not random. It's like, I guess, let's let it be this. If we were thinking of a test for God, it might be something random. But it's not random for him. And it's actually quite taxing. He says that he will choose the girl who gives him water and offers the water to his camels. Now, how many camels did he have? 10. Okay? And camels, they just sip a little bit, right? Yeah. No, they store it up. This is big stuff. I mean, so I read a camel can drink about 25 gallons. Okay, 25 gallons of water. So let's just use that as an average, okay? Multiply that out by 10 camels, and you've got 250 gallons of water that he is seeking someone to draw for him from this well or this spring. So I kind of thought this through, because, that's still 250 gallons. Like, I have a hard time picturing that. Let's say that Rebecca's jar, which wouldn't have been like some sort of nice plastic, it would have been probably ceramic. Let's say that that was like a 5-gallon bucket, okay? And so she was going to hold 250 gallons of water for camels. That means that she would have to draw 50 buckets of water. And add to that, if it wasn't just, the kind of well where you're pulling it up, let's say that it was, that would be hard. But if it was the type you actually walk down into, pulled it out of a spring, walk back up, pour in the trough, 50 times. I don't know that I could do that. I mean, by the end I'd be like dragging my carcass along, just trying to get another bucket of water up, right? So this was no small task that he was looking for. So why is he doing that? Oh, he just wants a hard-working woman. Well, not really. I don't think that was all that he's looking at with this test. Because Abraham had great wealth, and now the girl would not know that, because he wasn't flashing it all over the place and saying, "Ooh, look what I got to offer, and ladies, there's an eligible young bachelor here." It makes no mention that he's doing that. Rather, what he wanted to know is that, see, Abraham was known for his hospitality. Abraham had great wealth. He was blessed of God, but Abraham was very free with it. Whether it was his nephew Lot, or whether it was visitors that would come to him, Abraham was known for his hospitality and his giving. So the servant, very wisely, very shrewdly, wants to know that the woman for Isaac would be someone with that kind of heart. Someone who would be willing to break her back just to give this stranger's camels a drink. And so, of course, that's exactly what happens. But do you see there's intention here? And again, this guy's thinking, absolutely, he is relying on God's providence. He is saying, Lord, prepare the way based on your covenant, what you have promised. Prepare the way. But I'm going to use my brain too, because you gave me one of those, so I'm going to use it. And it's interesting, look what it says, before the servant is even done praying in his heart, Rebecca walks up. Now, I don't know if he saw her and he was like, oh man, she's the one. It doesn't really indicate that. It sounds like he still has some questions. But it makes me think of Isaiah 65, verse 24, where God says, before they call, I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear. And that's exactly what goes on here. As he's praying, I imagine him bowing down there, and as he's praying, and maybe he's kind of ending and looking up, wait, who's that over there? And it says that this guy's eager. I mean, he runs. So he goes from like kneeling position to sprinting. And he runs and he asks her his question, can you just give me a drink of water? And very quickly, she responds, hey, yeah, here's your drink, and tell you what, I'll get some water for your camels. And so it says that she just kind of moseys along, drags her bucket behind her, right? Is that what it says? No. Actually, it says that she quickly pours the water in the trough and then runs. I mean, look what it says. It says she runs to do this. So, I imagine she's run down, scoop, run back up, run down. It's like, she had stamina. I mean, she was no princess. She had stamina. The servant's response, I mean, it's awesome. He's just sitting there in amazement. It says he's gazing, going, I wonder if she's the one. I mean, really, I don't even know if he's saying I wonder. He's going, oh my word. No sooner had I gotten off my knees than God is already showing me in the clearest of tones that this is what he has. So he's amazed, absolutely amazed. And wouldn't you be? I mean, if you prayed something as specific as that, I mean, it was very specific what he asked God to do. And there it is happening, like moments later. Wouldn't you be amazed, jaw on the ground? It's exactly what he does. So at this point now, he breaks out some of the gifts. And what he gives, I just did some quick figures. It's quite impressive. So it says that he gives her a ring, probably like a nose ring, and bracelets. So if a shekel is about 12 grams, then I'm not a mathematician, but here's the math. Basically, he gives her like a $200 ring, probably went in her nose, based on the culture of the times, and then bracelets that were probably worth about $4,500. Okay, now even today, somebody walks up and gives you, $4,700 worth of stuff. That's a big deal. Okay, that was a big deal back then. But he didn't pull that out first thing. Okay? He waited until he knew that she had the kind of heart that he was looking for, that God was leading him to. Unlike her upcoming brother, she acted without knowledge of the wealth of what was coming. So, verse 27 then is part of the prayer that he offers up to the Lord afterward. He realizes, wow, she's the one. And he offers up this prayer of thanks. And in the King James, it's rendered, I being in the way the Lord led me. And this is sometimes this is portrayed as, man, I was just in the right place at the right time and it all happened. Almost in a passive sense. And I don't know that that's the spirit that is coming across here through that phrase. Because it's not a passive thing. It's not like he was just wandering and it just hit him in the face. There was planning on his side. There was wisdom, God-given wisdom, but there was always a reliance and a dependence and a boldness that came with the knowledge that God was preparing the way. So I think it should be understood as the Lord has been leading me in the way to the house of my master's brothers. So it's not just like whoa, I was in the right place at the right time. What a coincidence. It's not that. It is, wow, look at this. God has been leading the entire way. God was with this whole operation from the beginning. In other words, it's God's providence here is not a snapshot. It's not like, oh, look, like that happened. It's like this has been happening the whole time. And isn't that the way that God works? God doesn't just work like once here, once there. I guess it's been a while. Here we go again. It's like God is leading, He is preparing, and He is guiding us the entire time. And sometimes, well, often, we don't see that as we're going through it, but always in retrospect, we look back and we're like, wow, that was amazing. And that gives us strength and boldness for the next time that we're facing something. So that scene kind of closes. He asks Rebecca if he can stay the night with her family. And she says, and it's interesting, her response, I mean, she's not the matriarch of the family, yet she says, we've got plenty, come on. You can stay at our place, no problem. So that scene closes, and we open up at her house now, scene 3, starting verse 29. And now enters a new character that we're going to hear from quite a bit in the future. And his name is Laban. He's Rebecca's brother. It seems like he actually might be the head of the family, because you don't hear much about his father, Bethuel. And when you do, it's kind of a side mention. So it seems like he's kind of the man of the house, so to speak. While Rebecca acted first, Laban notices the expensive new jewelry hanging off her wrists and her face. And he goes, oh, what's going on here? That's new. And then the Bible says as much. As Rebecca's coming with this man and his entourage, first thing he notices, or I guess she just comes, and the first thing he notices is, what do you got? That's a lot of gold. He's doing some quick math in his mind, going, oh, hey, what's going on here? Where'd you get that from? And without just broad brushing Laban as the bad guy, there does seem to be a contrast here between the actions of Laban and the actions of the servant of Rebecca. And so we will look at it that way. So they bring the servant in, and they offer him food and refreshment. I mean, he's been traveling a long time. Of course he's going to want some food and wash his feet and all that kind of thing. But as they set that before him, he says, well, hold on. Before we get to that, and that's all fine and good, I have to talk about what I'm here to do. And this was wise for a couple of reasons, because it did set him in control. It released him of obligations. So, I'll partake of this great feast, and now we'll talk about the terms of what of Rebecca. So he was very wise, and we're going to find out, especially as he's dealing with Laban, he was very wise to do things that way. So verse 41 is part of the whole section where he is now recounting. He recounts the entire story. And it's interesting, as you read through it, you say, well, couldn't he have just said, couldn't the Bible have just said, and he recounted the story, and then moved on, right? I mean, you could have just done that. We already read it. But it retells the whole thing. How he came to the well, and how he prayed, and how Rebecca came, and she drew from the camels, and yada, yada, yada. That was something that they would do back then, but there's also some significant changes that he makes as he recounts the story. And those are significant because he is trying to convince this family, not that he needs Rebekah to marry Isaac so much, as he's trying to convince them that God's hand is strongly in this. Really, that would be the best determining factor anyway. And that's what he's really trying to do there. But in verse 41, as he talks about an oath, he recounts to them how that Abraham put him under an oath. The word that Abraham used for oath was like your basic, hey, swear that you are going to do this, promise that you will do this. The word that the servant, as he's retelling the story, uses for oath is something that's much more serious, borderline what you'd call a curse, with more of a negative impact to it. So he says, Abraham put me under an oath, such that if I go back on this, it's going to be bad. Okay, so, and what he's saying is, I can't go back on this. Okay, this is something that I have to do. I am under an oath. Okay, so some of those changes that the servant makes as he retells the story are important. Because again, he's not trying to swindle them. He's not trying to steal away Rebekah. He's trying to convince them that God's hand is here, and who are we to stand in God's way of what he's doing? Now, that wouldn't work today. If I had gone to Leah's dad and been like, okay, hey, look, here's the deal. God told me this is the way it's going to be, so I don't see you have a choice. I can tell you how that would have went over. I'd probably have a few more bruises. Anyway, so that might not work today, but this servant was very bold. And don't you see that in this story? There's a lot of boldness. Where did he get that from? Is he just a brash individual? I don't think so. I think he was somebody who was convinced that God was preparing the way. And he was spiritually wise enough to look at what was going on and say, God's hand is in every part of this. We can't stop. And so we see that now. We'll see that in just a little bit where he insists we can't get in the way of this. We have to keep going. So there is some conflict now that opens up in verse 55, where her family comes and they say, well, they say, okay, yeah, let's do it. Rebekah can go. This will be great. It's not like they don't know who Abraham is, so they're like, okay, let's do this. But then the next day, they get up and the servant's like, all right, let's go. And this family says, well, maybe, can she stay just a little bit longer? We got some preparations, got to put a few more sequins on the dress or something like that. And it wasn't like this wasn't customary. There was often a time that the bride would get things ready herself and all of her stuff because she was about to take a long trip. But what's interesting is the family's being quite vague about this. So they say 10 days or so. You can see that right there. They say, well, can she stay 10 days or so? And it's interesting, that makes a little more sense in English, but the phrase literally in the Hebrew is, well, maybe she can stay days or 10. That's literally what it says, days or 10. That's what they offer. And that sounds kind of weird and vague, and it is kind of weird and vague. And different people have tried to figure out what that means. Even rabbis have tried to look at this and figure out what it means. And so some people say it could be a few days. They could be talking a few years. But they're being intentionally vague. Like, well, maybe she should stay around just a little longer before she makes this really big decision and heads off. Now remember, and this is Laban who is saying this. Okay, Laban, the guy who we're going to learn later on, suckers Jacob into sticking around for 20 years. When Jacob was saying, all right, Rachel, she's the one, man, and, oh, yeah, Rachel, you got to work about 7 years for her, and then the wedding day, that's Leah, oh, that's not Rachel, oh, my bad, 7 more years, okay? And so this is the guy we're talking about, Laban, okay? Time management, well, he knows what he's doing. He's willing to really pull it over someone's eyes. But the servant's much wiser than Jacob was. And the servant says, no, we can't stick around. We either go or we don't. So it's the servant, again, he shows a godly wisdom that is based on God's providence, on his being convinced that God is moving here. God is working and he is moving, and we cannot stay in the way. And so we see a boldness with him that keeps moving and pushing and driving. And so he refuses to delay and insists that they have to go now. And in verse 58, they say, okay, Rebecca, what do you say? And look at what Rebecca says. She doesn't go, oh. She says, I will go. That's it. That's it. There's no reasoning, just, I will go. And so she's actually much more decisive than her family is. They're going, well, maybe this, maybe that. And maybe Laban knew that the longer I get this guy to stick around, maybe a little more of that gold will come off him, Who knows? Without trying to make Laban out to be the bad guy or something like that. But now we know why they needed 10 camels, right? I mean, that was like the ancient Oriental version of a U-Haul. So now they're packing Rebecca up, and they are moving her all the way down to, what is it now, Israel. So that scene closes. And as we open up in the last scene here, we see a focus move in this story. And this is actually a very big move of focus because so far everything's been about Abraham. Abraham's been kind of the main character. And in this story, in the beginning, we actually hear the very last words that we understand from Abraham's mouth. And as the servant moves off, so does Abraham. By the time we get to the end of this story, we don't even hear about Abraham. And in the very next chapter, then, Abraham actually passes on. So there's a very big move going on here. But I can imagine this opening up. Maybe you see like a field at sunset. Okay? Just imagine. Okay? See a field at sunset. You see the tall grass kind of waving in the breeze. Then you see the hand going through the grass. I mean, you can see that, right? And we look up, and there's Isaac as he's walking through this field. That's exactly what the Bible says is going on. It says that he's out there meditating. It's a strange word because actually we don't know what it means. It's the only time it's used. But whatever he's doing, he's out walking, he's out thinking. Obviously, he's probably thinking about who is this person that they're bringing. I mean, he's had no part in the decision, remember? That's a little scary. I want to talk about matchmaking. That's frightening. So, I mean, you can imagine there would be some thought going through his mind. But it says that he's out there. He's meditating. He's thinking. He's walking. And in both of their instances, it says that they look up. He looked up. He saw the caravan. As she's coming in on the camels, she looks up. She says, "Who is that?" I don't know if she asked that question a lot. I don't think she was. And I don't think it's like "Are we there yet?" Kind of thing. But I think it was kind of more that knowing, like, now who is that? It's like they both looked up and they both knew. Now he probably knew because, hey, look, there's a caravan coming. It didn't just happen. But and then you look at her response. In verse 64, now if you're reading in the King James, it's always kind of cracked me up. It could be a little misleading. Because if you're reading there, it says that Rebecca, when she saw Isaac, lighted off her camel. Doesn't mean that she lit up a cigarette. Okay? Let's cover that one and make sure we understand what's not going on. She wasn't that stressed. But it is an interesting phrase because literally the words are she fell off from above. So like, if you're just reading it literally, it would be Rebecca looked up, she saw him, she fell off her camel. Now it doesn't literally mean like she was clumsy and she lost her balance and off she went. That would frankly be a very high place to fall from. But it's the same word that's actually used in, remember the story of Naaman and I think it was Elisha and his servant? And you remember as Naaman is healed and he's going away and he offered gifts and Elisha said, no, we're not doing that. Then remember Elisha's servant, Gehazi, he goes running after Naaman because he's going, no gifts, forget you. He goes running after him and it says that Naaman, as he sees the guy running after him, he stops, same word, gets out of his chariot. So it's kind of like he jumps out of his chariot. It's not like a real gingerly kind of stepping out. He jumps out, and it's the same thing here. When Rebecca sees Isaac and she understands, she probably understands what's going on, she jumps off that camel. She's out of there. Okay, and you see this with her. There's no slow movement. There's no putting off or dragging her feet. It's like she acts. And we see that here too. She says, who is that guy? You kind of get the idea that she knows. She knows who that is. And so they meet and they come together. In verse 67, it's important here. It says that Isaac is comforted by Rebekah's presence after his mother's death. The fact is, the story is bookended by both the death of his mother and then in the next chapter, the death of Abraham himself. And so it's an important part of Isaac's life here. The bringing of Rebekah to him. Because Rebekah was a big, huge comfort to him. Got him through these tough times. I mean, he'd been with his mother and father for a long time now, and they were pretty big people themselves. So it's not accidental that this story ends this way. You think, well, that's kind of an odd way to end the story, but really it's not, because that's part of the intention, part of God's providence here, knowing that Isaac needed comfort, and God brought to him, through an incredible set of circumstances, the person who could really comfort him during his time of sorrow. It's a great story, right? Great story of matchmaking done right. But so what? I mean, so what does that really mean for us? And I would offer you this, something that you can bring home. Here it is. Act in faith, knowing that God has prepared the way. Let me say that again. Act in faith, knowing that God has prepared the way. It could even go the other way. If we know that God has prepared the way, we can act boldly in faith. We can step out, afraid, sure, but confident, bold, knowing that the God who has prepared the way all so far will continue to do so. Just like this servant, he gets to that city, he gets to that well, and you know what? It's wide open in front of him. That's a little scary. He's got this huge task of finding a wife for his master. And so he gets down on his knees. Not because he just doesn't know what to do, but because he knows that the God who's prepared the way so far will prepare the way. And when he sees that happening, he acts very boldly. And really puts himself out there and steps out in faith. So we believe, at least with our words, that God is interested and invested in the details of our life. I mean, if I was to ask you, of course, everyone would give the right answer. Of course God's interested. He's invested in every detail of our life. But do we, in fact, live that way? And that's not something that show of hands tells. That's something that our heart and our life will tell. Do we really believe that God is preparing and a part of every step in our life? Both the ones that we are confident about, the ones that we're like, yeah, I don't know if I can take that step. I don't know where that goes. The servant acted boldly, believing that the one who promised would come through. What has God promised that we're afraid to act on? Here's some thoughts. How about Matthew 28, verse 20, the Great Commission? God's commissioned us to go, to make disciples. And he has promised us in that he will be with us, even to the end of the age, for all time. No matter where we go, no matter what we do. He says, I'm sending you, but you're not alone. I'm with you. If we really believe that, you know what, we can go boldly. Now, what about, no. They're aside. God says go, you go. And that doesn't just mean like going across the sea. That means going next door. That means meeting your neighbor. That means telling them about Christ, living Christ in front of them. How about Psalm 139 and verse 7? You know, where can I go from your spirit? If I ascend into heaven, you're there. If I descend into the grave, you're there. What are those times in our lives where we are feeling anxiety? Where we're in a time where we're feeling like, you know what, I'm in a place that I don't think God's here. Yet God promises us there is nowhere that you can go that I'm not there. Or 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sin, he's faithful, he's just to forgive us our sin. So if we agree with God about our sin, he forgives us. It's really not about forgiving ourselves. It's understanding God's forgiveness of us. He says, look, you just agree with me. You look at it and you stop saying, oh, no, that's not so bad. I just made a mistake. I just messed up. That's all. And you say, no, God says that's sin. Yeah, that's sin. God says, okay, now I can forgive you, and I will forgive you. And that's my promise. Romans 6:14. Where it says that sin is not our master. We're under grace. And yet we live like, I just can't help myself. It just happens. I'm a victim. It's poor me. I don't mean to. I didn't mean to sin. I didn't mean to hurt that person. I didn't mean to say what I said. It just happened. And yet God says, sin is not your master. Sin has no control over you. You don't have to do anything. Because you are under grace. Or Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6, trust in the Lord He will make the path straight. He will direct your way. I mean, we see that in the story. You trust in the Lord. You really, honestly, not just say, oh, I trust in you, of course. But you really do. You really believe him. That when he tells you to do something or he makes a promise, that he really means business. That you mean business too. And we could go on and on with countless times that God has given us promises. That God has told us, I will be with you. You can do this. What you're thinking, what you're feeling, it's not true. And that's freedom. That's a release. And yet we hold on to it. We say, oh, no, I can't do that. What if? What if I step out and nothing's there? What if I fall? What if I step out and no one catches me? God says no. No, you're not believing me. You're not really believing me. Step. Step. So how about you? How about you? I mean, we can read this story about the servant. We can understand what's going on. And we can look at his great faith and say, well, that was him. I'm under a different set of circumstances. You don't really understand what it's like. God, I mean, that was then, this is now. Is it? Have things really changed that much? Or is God still true when he says there's nothing new under the sun? It just changes faces and colors and shapes and sizes, but really there's nothing new in this world. And the things that we read about then, the struggles that they had, we still have today. And let's not pretend that the servant was just Mr. Strong and he just pulled himself up by his bootstraps. No. This is the guy that went to the town, looked at what he had to do, and fell on his face before God. He said, God, I need you to make this happen. That's the kind of faith that we can have. You read in Hebrews 11, say the hall of faith. And it sounds like just this great victorious group of people who just were unswaying and just went ahead and they were strong, and I'm not. And you actually read the stories of those people, and for every time that they were strong and confident, they were weak and fallen. And yet God took them and bolstered them with his promises. God wants to do the same thing today with us, with this group of people. We may look around and say, oh, we're a ragtag group of people. What can we do? But yet God is calling each one of us to do something, whether it's something little or something big, whether it's go across the ocean or go across the street, or just talk to the person next to you in the gym, or whatever it might be. What is God calling you to do? What is God tapping on the shoulder? What is he whispering in your ear that he wants you to do? Because there's something he wants you for that he doesn't want me for, or the other person. And if he has in fact done that, and he has, then his promises, his providence, his guidance, his preparing the way is behind you. And you can step out and you can act bolder than you even feel comfortable